Hey, welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Ham Radio Dude. I'm going to make this intro quick. Recently, I was at a garage sale and I found a 2.5 foot high by 3 foot wide box of ham gear for $10. Couldn't pass it up. And I figured I would document some of the old stuff that was in there. Today, I want to document the MFJ model 815B. So we're going to go through this thing and just take a good overall look at it. Let's get started. And don't forget to hit subscribe. If you don't know what the Model 815B is from MFJ, quite simply all it is an SWR power meter that works on the HF bands. So let's go ahead and go through cleaning this and trying to make this thing look good, but then also seeing if it works. We're going to look inside to see just how everything looks as far as are there any bulging capacitors or anything that needs to be addressed inside. Jumping onto Universal Radio's website, you can see that this says that it's good for frequency ranges of 1.8 megahertz up to 30 megahertz, and it does mention that the average power readings or the power ranges from 200 to 2000 watts forward and 50 to 500 watts reflected. This one happens to have an MSRP of $80, as you can see, and it has 11 reviews. It does say the product is in production, which everything I've seen actually indicates that the product's not in production anymore. And we can check on that in just a few moments. You see that the average rating on this is a 3.1 star out of 5, and that could be intimidating for somebody trying to buy this. Now, I haven't even tested this out or played with this at all, so I don't know. But I did make note that, as I just discussed, this is supposed to be good for 1.8 megahertz to 30 megahertz. And I noticed that a couple of these reviews, at least 2 of these reviews, which are pretty poorly reviewed, people were upset because these meters didn't work on 6 meters and they were supposed to go up to 60 megahertz. So I want to also try to figure out where the misconception is on that and what the actual accurate answer is. Let's go ahead real quick and see if I can't find any information whether or not this product actually is still in production. I'll go to MFJ's website and kind of get an idea also to see if there is something I'm missing about the 1.8 megahertz to 30 megahertz claim versus the 60 megahertz claim I'm seeing on these reviews. So I found this manual and it wasn't on MFJ's website. In fact, MFJ's website only had the Model 815C available to download. And so here we are with the 815B. I got this at bama.edebris.com, and you could see clearly it says in the first paragraph of this document that it's good from 1.8 to 60 megahertz. So those reviews were probably accurate as to what they were, what they thought they were getting. I will say that this gentleman also wrote 1.8 to 30 megahertz, so I wonder if sometime in the history or the production of this, MFJ maybe realized that it wasn't going to do 60 megahertz and they dialed it down to advertise as 30 megahertz. And I'm not sure about that, but I'd be curious. And I should note, I don't have any extensive testing equipment. I'll just be doing some basic tests on this, but let's go ahead and clean this up and open it up and see what we got inside. But anyway, you look at this and the buttons are working just fine. You look on the back and the SO239 connectors in the back actually look really clean. Yeah, you do see this typical issue where the feet have melted and slid off or whatever over time. But everything else looks good. I got this kind of wiped down. Actually looks a lot better already. I think right now what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and open this up and just take a look inside and see how it looks in there. There's 3 screws on either side, as you can see here. And then here. And today, to actually be taking apart this radio, I'm going to use this new kit that I recently bought, and it's the iFixit screwdriver kit. And look at, there's a bit for just about everything in there. I will say it doesn't look like anybody's ever been inside of here, because typically if somebody's been inside, you know, you get a little bit of markings on the screws, but I don't think anybody's ever been inside of this. So there is a couple of capacitors here. And what I'm looking for in the capacitors, I'm looking to see if typically the top of these capacitors should be flat, and if they have any kind of like an arc to them or arch to them, that would be indicative of a bulging capacitor. Or if there's any kind of weird yellow substance on the top here, that would mean you have a leaking capacitor. But these capacitors actually look pretty good. Just to give you guys an idea of what the solder joints look like on here. And then there's a close-up of that board as well. I'm going to look up that part number and I'll be right back. So while I was looking for the part number, you know, you could only see part of the part number. These wires, they're pretty well on there. They're not going to budge too much. I don't want to force them and break them off. I did take a look at everything else, like the resistors. It doesn't appear like any of the solder joints came loose and there's nothing missing per se. You can make your adjustments for calibration on here if you needed to. But what I did notice after I looked through everything was there's your model number right there. And really what I was looking for was 1997. So I would assume that this board was made sometime in the late 90s, maybe early 2000s. And I would say it's in pretty clean shape for what it is. Going through the box of stuff that I got at this garage sale, I did find a power supply in here, and it does say it's 12 volts, 700 milliamp hours, minus neutral plus. So let me just confirm that that's going to work. Minus neutral plus 12 volts DC. I think we're going to be good. I'm going to clean this up though real quick. And as I mentioned, this is 12 volts, 700 milliamp hours, and the official MFJ power supply, the 1312D, is 12 volts, 500 milliamp hours. I don't think that's going to be a huge deal, but as you can see, it's plugged in. And I don't get any lamp on the meter, so I need to test this to make sure that this is going to function. The quickest way I have to test it is this this hard drive cloning device I have that also runs on 12 volts. And it powers on just fine. So now I need to find out what might be going on with this and can we replace the bulb. Now realistically, this is very clean. It's probably just a bad bulb, but I do want to make sure that there's continuity from the power jack area to that red wire right here. But then also, depending on if this button is pressed or depressed, if continuity continues, I think, through this yellow wire. So we'll find that out, but the first thing we need to do is make sure that the continuity portion of this meter is working. Looks like it's working just fine. All right, so let's just see here what we got going on as far as continuity goes. There we go, I got it. It's just you got to be careful because the wires are very tight. And so here's the bulb, and I do have this old chassis here, and I was able to pull this out here, so I have a bulb here as well. And I'm just going to see if I could swap them out and see if that'll work. If not, I'll have to get a bulb on order. Okay, so I actually started looking at this, and it's not like this bulb just pops out. This whole thing is like one piece, and so in order to replace this, I would have to find the actual part that looks just like this. Now, the one I have in the other MFJ, the donor model MFJ here, it is pretty bad shape. The capacitor is all damaged, and I could probably replace all that, but the bulb that's on that one too looks to be as if it's seen better days. So I think the best thing for me to do is put this back in here for now, and then we'll go ahead and replace that at a later date once I get the replacement part. Let's test out the rest of the meter and see if the rest of the meter even works. If I do need to calibrate this thing requires 1,000 watts of power to be calibrated properly because it's a 2,000 watt SWR meter. I only have a 100 watt transmitter, being the ICOM IC7300, so I'm going to just see if I'm getting a semi-accurate representation of the power out here. And then I'm going to check the SWR. And if you guys don't know, the SWR needle, you basically find the intersecting points, and that's where your SWR is going to be. So if the intersecting points were like right here, you'd probably be at a 1.1 to 1 SWR. Let's go ahead and try that, and then let's go through the bands from 1.9 megahertz all the way up to 50 megahertz to see if this thing is actually a up to 6 meter SWR meter, or if it's only up to 30 megahertz like some people have said. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump through the bands here. We're going to start around 1.9 megahertz. We're going to go do 80 meters. We're going to do 40 meters, 20 meters, 10 meters, and then we'll try 6 meters to see how this meter looks throughout the spectrum or the band. And so here I am with 100 watts and FM power, starting at 160 meters. And now we're going to go up to 10 meters. And we start to see a slight increase in our SWR. I wouldn't even call it a 1.1 to 1, but it's maybe a 1.1 to 1. No, it's still pretty much a 1-to-1, slightly higher than a 1-to-1. And then if we take this up to 50 megahertz or 6 meter band now, we're still showing 100 watts forward power, but we're somewhere around, I believe that says 1.4 to 1 SWR. So definitely have some issues with this within the 6 meter band, like many people have been saying. Let's take a look at the average power now. As you can see, the meter goes a lot slower. And there you go. Let's bring it back down to 20 meters. So real quick, I just went ahead and I pressed in this, so I should have the full 2000 watt meter now. And in my theory, I should be able to be at about 100 watts right about here. And it's a little bit high. And now we got to test the reflective power. So we've just been testing the forward power here. Let's check the reflective power. The instructions on the MFJ manual that I found do show that, hey, you want to bring this radio down to 10 watts, and I tested that it was 10 watts. And then to test reflective power, swap the cables in the back so your dummy load is where your transmitter was and vice versa. And then when you key up you should be right at 10 watts of reflective power. So I did everything as far as making sure I was at 10 watts, swapping the cables, and now let's see where we are on the power meter. And I'm doing this on 14 megahertz as per the instructions. Looks good, looks good. I've taken the cables out of the back now, and I think we're just about ready to put everything together. I believe that I've tested this to the best of my abilities, or at least checked to make sure that everything appears to be functioning to the best of the abilities with the tools that I had. Right, so quickly, I have actually some of these laying around the house, and I think these will be good. Probably these ones. They're about the same size. All right. I'm using acetone on here, and acetone actually seems to be doing the job. So if you're looking for an entry-level SWR power meter, you might be able to find one of these for 40 bucks or 30 bucks, and that would be a decent deal. Just make sure everything is working and functioning correctly. And, you know, be advised or be aware that it's not going to work on 6 meters. It might be good only up to 30 megahertz, as they say, and maybe even a little less than that. But I wanted to document this so we have something on record about this device. And should you have any questions, leave me a comment below. Thanks for checking out the channel. I'm Ham Radio Dude 73.